All right. Something that's sort of, these are in some ways probably backwards. In some ways, functions is actually higher on the abstraction stack, but both sort of at the same broad level, which is that you're not having to manage infrastructure, you're just focusing on writing your code. How many people are familiar with functions? You, third maybe? Okay. So the idea of functions is to really allow you to focus exclusively on your code and to be able to write code in these very small snippets to handle potentially spiky events that are happening and run that code in the cloud. Now, I talked about PaaS being a term that's not so useful. Serverless is the term that has caught fire with respect to things like functions and AWS Lambda. It's okay, it's fine. It's a little bit weird because there are actually servers back there. What's that?
Yeah, there's got to be a server that deals with your thing somewhere. Right? So serverless kind of like
we haven't figured out how to run code in actual clouds yet. So there are actually machines sitting in an Azure data center somewhere with lights blinking and hard drives and CPUs actually running your code, right? But the idea here is that it's serverless from your perspective as the customer, right? I just write my code and it runs and it scales based on the demand that comes in for that function, and I don't have to deal with patching the OS. I don't have to deal with thinking about scaling that function on a VM basis. So one of the differences between functions and app service, and this is why I think maybe functions are probably higher level in the abstraction stack, is with app service, you're not allowed to connect to the machines. You're not responsible for doing things like OS patching, but you're still thinking about the number and size of VMs that you want to run your app service. So you still have some visibility into the notion of VMs as a concept, because that's the unit of scaling. The cool thing about functions is you're actually scaling very granularly based on the invocations to the function, which is really cool because it means that if you're just getting started with your function and just playing around with it yourself, like you're not having to set up a whole VM to run that function, which is kind of cool.
Is there some limits to it? Like, I mean, there are like some sane limits. If somebody DDoSes your endpoint there that's handled by a function, is it gonna like scale?
Yeah, you can set up some constraints. The limits are really around like the limits that you can set up around memory usage. So that's kind of the thing that you're thinking about, not so much like VM, but like what is the memory required to run this function. So that's the thing that you're sliding, but yeah, you can set up constraints so that it doesn't get overwhelmed and you don't get charged arm and a leg. The other cool thing that functions does is provide a bunch of bindings into existing services. So a lot of the types of scenarios that people are interested in using functions for are these kind of event-driven cloud code invocation. It's based off of some event that's happening in some other service, right? So you drop a file into OneDrive or BlobStore or Box, and you want to just have some chunk of code, some like 50-line function that's going to go do some transformation to that file, or take the title of it and put it in a table store somewhere. So just those kind of small pieces of execution that you want to have run without having to think about like setting up a whole application. You just want to have literally like a method. So here's an example of that, where somebody takes a picture on their phone and it gets posted into BlobStore as a result of that photo getting dropped into Blob Store. There's a webhook that fires that notifies the function to go run, and it goes and creates images at various scales to be used in different environments. All right, let's see if we can.
This gentleman here has a question.
Yeah, so I guess this is pushing you towards like a microservice style architecture. So what do you offer in terms of logging to ensure that we can determine breakages in our applications?
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with the logging functionality. I know there is, at least what I've played around with, there is logging available there, but in terms of how you can wire it up to Elk or OMS or something like that, I believe it's there, but I've never done it myself. Yeah, it is. So I'll get to a little bit later talking about microservices and kind of, because that's one of the questions that comes up often is like, hey, I hear microservices are the hot new thing. Like, if I'm doing functions, am I doing microservices? If I'm doing service fabric, am I doing microservices? Like, please somebody tell me how to do microservices. And so we've got kind of a nuanced answer to that, which I'll get to in a second. A sense of what that looks like. So I've got a function app here, which is basically just a container based on a set of functions. And what I'm going to do, if it comes up, go Gadget Network.
How are functions built? Is it a higher throughput? Like, is it compute, every network, everything?
It's based on invocations of the function and what you've set up in terms of the memory capacity for that function. So if I go here and create a new function, so there was that box on the side that had some of the different services that I can set up. So here's some of those templates. I can go into like GitHub. So let's create a GitHub one. And so this template will set me up with a function that's going to take in a HTTP request coming from a GitHub webhook that gets fired whenever a new comment gets added to a repo. And we'll stitch that together in a second. And then it's just going to respond back with that comment. So fairly basic, but kind of gives you the idea of how you can build these sort of event-driven pieces of code. So let's go to GitHub. And what we're going to do, create a new repo. Don't let anybody stealing my awesome code. There's actually not going to be any code in here. It's just going to be issues. So I'm going to go over here into settings, into webhooks, and this is where I can set up a webhook for when a change happens in GitHub to fire that off. And this has nothing to do with functions per se. You can use this for all kinds of things. We have one set up for when new issues come in to fire an event into our Slack channel for the team. So this has nothing to do with functions, but it gives you an idea of how you could have an event that's driven off of a different service result in some code running that you've written. So what I need to do is go back to the function itself and get two things. One, the URL that GitHub webhook should call once it's ready, and then the secret. Let's go stitch them together. We will change it to, since the template code is all about comments on issues, so we'll add, set it so that only when an issue gets commented on will the webhook fire. Go ahead and add that. And now what we need to do is go create an issue. And then And what we'll see, if we go back over to the settings here and go back to our webhook. Oh, that's not a good. Delivered.
Copy icon again.
Yeah, you know, I don't trust this thing. I don't know about you guys. These things work like 5% of the time for me. Let's see. Maybe it worked. I think I've got one.
Just to put the link.
What's that?
Put the link in the browser.
Is it running again?
Put a link in the browser. Let me just go to one that I've already got.
I wasn't sure if you hit the run button or you need to. Does the function auto run?
Yeah, this.
Does it require any warming up or anything like that?
No, I mean that's the whole kind of serverless screen. I mean, it does in the sense that it's not already in memory. The code needs to be loaded and run, but it typically only takes 1 second. Try this one. It's not happening. I'm not sure why. All right. Well, that's what you would have seen is the response coming back from the function as a result of that invocation from the GitHub webhook. It's the first demo that's failed for me out of 3 sessions, so that's pretty good. Bottom line, you know, functions are a really great way to just be able to go write some code, have it run in the cloud without, again, having to think about not only setting up machines, but like also like what is the application that I'm building, how do I get it deployed, all that kind of stuff. Just go write some code in the browser, or you can do it in Visual Studio, and deploy that really quickly. Okay, very good kind of the service fabric session yesterday. Fair number. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time like.
Sorry, the functions are highly reliable?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not like you don't have to think about like how many instances of the function do I need to have running in order to make sure that they're always available. Like that's just handled for you on the best platform.
So is it true that people are now building endpoints? Like when you used to have like an MVC app with a controller where you had specific REST endpoints in that one thing, but they're now saying, okay, let's do all of this as functions, right? So every single thing is a function, and you kind of manage it that way. Maybe it
Yeah,
calls
so
out to other services from there.
A common pattern, or at least something that's getting some traction now, is the idea of having a series of functions and then putting something like API management on top of it to provide that kind of common abstraction that then is calling into all of those functions behind the scenes.
Can be used to IoT. Can you call a function?
Can you call a function from IoT? I mean, anything that's able to make a web API call.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Since the function is small, we can expect that there will be too many functions. These are way to manage that.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely becomes one of the challenges is, and this kind of segues, I think, a little bit into talking about Service Fabric in the notion that if you're trying to build an application out of a ton of functions, it can become a little bit unwieldy to think about like, okay, my application is now made up of like 1,000 independent functions that have no real relationship to each other than I can see them together in the portal, right? And so that is something that can be a little tricky to manage. So I think it's going to, time will tell how those patterns emerge of how people use that type of platform. It was sort of initially thought of as having these things that are just truly independent. They're event driven. They do something very specific, and necessarily in a fully stateless fashion. Take in some input, run some code, send it back. As we start to see people experimenting with having a bunch of functions that are stitched together with an API management layer and represent a full application, I think we're going to start to see patterns emerge in how you manage that.